As the final days of Ramadan begin, something very mysterious starts happening in the lives of some believers. Their hearts begin to change, their du'as become deeper, and suddenly, the topic of marriage starts appearing around them in unexpected ways. Many people later realize something surprising. Right before their nikah happened, they noticed certain signs during the last nights of Ramadan. Signs in their prayers, signs in their heart, and signs in the people Allah placed around them. Most people ignore these signs, but those who understand them often realize that Allah may be preparing a beautiful blessing in their life, a blessing that completes half of their faith. Nikah. Today we will talk about 6 signs that may appear during the final 5 days of Ramadan. Signs that your marriage may be closer than you think. But before we begin, tell me something in the comments. Where are you watching this video from? And what time is it right now in your city? During most days of the year, people make many kinds of du'as. Some ask Allah for success in work. Some ask for relief from difficulties. Some ask for health, peace, or protection for their families. And sometimes, quietly within the heart, a believer also asks Allah for something very special, a righteous spouse. For some people, this du'a may have been made for years, perhaps during sujud, perhaps during tahajjud, perhaps in moments when the heart felt lonely and in need of companionship. But something very interesting often begins to happen during the final days of Ramadan. The du'a suddenly feels different. It is no longer just words spoken on the tongue. It becomes something that rises deeply from the heart. A person may be sitting quietly after Isha prayer, or raising their hands in the last part of the night, and suddenly the du'a for marriage feels heavier than before, more sincere, more emotional, more real. Sometimes tears appear without warning, and the person may not even understand why their heart is feeling this way. But there is a beautiful wisdom behind this moment. Many scholars explain something very powerful about du'a. They say that when Allah intends to give a blessing to His servant, He often first places the desire for that blessing inside the heart. In other words, the du'a itself becomes part of the preparation. The servant begins asking more sincerely. Their heart becomes softer. Their trust in Allah grows stronger. And the connection between the servant and their Lord becomes deeper. Ramadan is a time when this transformation happens very often, because the entire atmosphere of Ramadan brings hearts closer to Allah. People pray more. They recite the Quran more. They wake up for tahajjud. They sit in quiet reflection during the night. And during the last 10 nights, especially the final days, something even more special happens. These nights carry immense mercy. They contain Laylatul Qadr, a night that Allah describes in the Quran as better than 1,000 months. During these nights, believers open their hearts in ways they may not have done before. And sometimes when a person begins making a du'a about marriage with deep sincerity during these blessed nights, it is not just a random thought. It may be a sign that Allah is preparing something for their life, perhaps a meeting that has not happened yet, perhaps a proposal that has not yet appeared, perhaps a person who is also somewhere making the same du'a at that very moment. Because the story of many marriages begins long before the couple ever meet. It begins with du'a, a quiet moment in the night, a heart turning toward Allah, a believer asking sincerely for a partner who will bring them closer to faith, someone who will remind them to pray, someone who will walk beside them toward Jannah. And sometimes during the final days of Ramadan, that du'a begins to feel stronger because the answer is slowly approaching. But the believer may not yet see it. They only feel a strange sense of hope growing inside their heart, a calm trust that Allah is listening. And when that kind of sincere du'a rises from the heart during the blessed nights of Ramadan, it is never wasted, because Allah hears every whisper, and He answers every sincere prayer in the best way and at the best time. So if during these final days of Ramadan you find your heart repeatedly turning to Allah and asking for a righteous spouse with deep sincerity, do not ignore that feeling. It may simply be your heart, or it may be the beginning of a beautiful story that Allah has already written for your future. One of the most beautiful ways Allah prepares a person for nikah is not by immediately bringing the spouse into their life. Instead, He begins by changing the heart. Because marriage in Islam is not just two people living together, it is a responsibility, it is a trust, it is a journey of faith. And before Allah grants a believer this blessing, He often prepares their heart for it. During the last days of Ramadan, Many believers begin to notice something unusual inside themselves. Things that once seemed important suddenly feel empty. Conversations that once felt exciting no longer bring the same satisfaction. Attention from people who once seemed interesting suddenly feels meaningless. A person may scroll through their phone or talk with friends and suddenly feel a strange realization growing inside their heart. This is not what I truly want. Instead, a different kind of desire begins appearing. A desire for something pure, something stable, something blessed. The heart begins wanting a partner who reminds them of Allah, a partner who encourages prayer, a partner who shares the same path toward Jannah. And this change may happen quietly. No one else may notice it. But inside the believer's heart, a transformation begins. And this transformation is very important, because Allah often cleans the heart before granting a major blessing. In the same way that a farmer prepares the soil before planting seeds, Allah prepares the heart before placing a life partner inside it. Ramadan itself is a time of purification. Fasting softens the heart. Night prayers strengthen the soul. Recitation of the Quran fills the mind with guidance. And when these acts of worship continue through the last days of Ramadan, something powerful happens. The heart begins to detach from distractions. Worldly noise starts fading, and the believer begins seeing life more clearly. They realize that temporary relationships are not worth their peace. They understand that attention from people who do not bring them closer to Allah is not valuable. And slowly, without forcing anything, their priorities begin to change. Instead of wanting excitement, they want tranquility. Instead of wanting admiration, they want sincerity. Instead of wanting temporary affection, they want a relationship built on faith. This shift is often one of the strongest signs that a person is becoming ready for marriage. Because Nikah in Islam is not just emotional connection. It is a partnership built on responsibility, mercy, and trust. Allah describes marriage in the Quran in a very beautiful way. He says that spouses are garments for one another. A garment protects, a garment comforts, a garment covers the flaws of the one wearing it. When this means that the purpose of marriage is not just companionship, it is protection, it is peace, it is support on the path to Allah. And when Allah intends to grant someone this blessing, He often first removes the desire for things that could damage that future relationship. For example, a person who once enjoyed meaningless conversations may suddenly start avoiding them. Someone who once chased attention may begin valuing privacy. Someone who once feared commitment may begin imagining a peaceful home filled with faith. These changes may feel confusing at first. The person may even wonder why their mindset is suddenly different. But in reality, this is often spiritual preparation. Allah is shaping their heart so that when the right person enters their life, they are ready to value the blessing properly. Without this preparation, many marriages struggle. People bring unhealthy habits into the relationship. They bring emotional baggage. They bring distractions that weaken the bond between husband and wife. But when Allah prepares the heart first, the marriage becomes stronger. The couple begins their journey with sincerity instead of confusion, with faith instead of ego, with patience instead of selfishness. And this is why many people later look back and realize something remarkable. Before their marriage happened, their heart went through a quiet transformation. They stopped chasing temporary attention. They began focusing more on their relationship with Allah. And suddenly, not long after that change, the door to Nikah opened. Because when Allah prepares the heart, the blessing often follows soon after. And so if during the final days of Ramadan, you feel your heart changing, your priorities shifting, your desires becoming more sincere, do not ignore this transformation. It may simply be spiritual growth, or it may be a beautiful preparation for a new chapter of your life that Allah is slowly bringing closer. Sometimes the signs that Allah is preparing something in your life do not only appear inside your heart, they begin appearing around you, in the people you meet, in the conversations you hear, in the unexpected moments that seem too coincidental to ignore. Many believers later notice something fascinating when they look back at the time before their Nikah. They realize that long before the proposal happened, long before they met their spouse, the topic of marriage had already started appearing everywhere in their life. And often this begins during the blessed days of Ramadan, especially in the final nights when hearts are soft. Families gather more often, and people reflect deeply about their future. At first, the signs may seem small. A family member may suddenly ask you a simple question. When do you think you will get married? A relative you rarely speak with may bring up the topic of proposals. A friend might casually mention someone who could be a good match. Even elders in the family may begin giving advice about marriage without any clear reason. At first it feels random, just ordinary conversation. But then it happens again and again. The topic keeps appearing in unexpected ways, and the person begins to wonder, why is everyone suddenly talking about this? This pattern is not uncommon. Because when Allah begins opening the door to something important in a believer's life, He often starts by aligning the circumstances around them. The conversation begins before the opportunity begins before the meeting, and the meeting begins before the Nikah that Allah has already written. Islam teaches us that nothing in life happens by coincidence. Everything happens by the wisdom and decree of Allah. Even the people who enter our lives at certain moments are part of a larger plan that we often cannot see yet. During Ramadan, this becomes even more powerful, because Ramadan is not only a month of fasting, it is a month where hearts reconnect with their purpose. Families spend more time together. Relatives visit one another. Community gatherings increase. People speak more openly about faith, irresponsibility, and the future. And within these conversations, the topic of marriage often begins to surface naturally. Sometimes it appears during a simple iftar gathering. Someone might say something like, "You have grown so much. Perhaps it is time to start thinking about marriage." Or during Eid preparation, an elder may quietly suggest that the family begin considering proposals. Even strangers may unknowingly mention something related to marriage. A lecture you listen to suddenly talks about the beauty of Nikah. A reminder at the mosque emphasizes the importance of building a righteous family. A conversation between friends turns toward future plans. Little by little, the idea begins surrounding your life. At first, you may not pay much attention, but over time, you begin realizing something. This topic is appearing far more often than before, and this is when many believers begin understanding something important. Allah often moves the environment around you before He moves your life forward. He prepares your family. He prepares the people who may introduce you to someone. He prepares the circumstances that will eventually bring two lives together. Even the person who will become your spouse may be going through similar signs at the same time. Perhaps they are also hearing conversations about marriage more frequently. Perhaps their family is also beginning to discuss proposals. Perhaps their heart is also turning toward Allah in dua during the same nights of Ramadan. Two people who have never met, living completely separate lives. Yet Allah is quietly guiding both of them toward the same moment in the future. And this is one of the most beautiful realities of destiny. Allah already knows the meeting point. He already knows the moment when two families will connect. He already knows the day when two hearts will recognize each other. But before that moment arrives, He sometimes allows the signs to appear gently. Conversations begin, suggestions arise. Ideas are planted in the minds of parents and relatives. The path slowly begins forming, not in a dramatic way, not in a sudden announcement, but in quiet steps that unfold naturally over time. And many people only realize this pattern after everything has already happened. They look back and say, "Subhanallah, the signs were there all along." The conversations, the hints from family, the advice from elders, the repeated reminders about marriage. And all of it was preparing the moment that eventually arrived. And that moment often began during a time when the heart was already close to Allah. During Ramadan, during the nights filled with dua, during the period when the believer had placed their trust fully in Allah's plan. So if during these final days of Ramadan you notice something interesting, if people around you are suddenly mentioning marriage more often, if family members are asking questions they never asked before, if friends begin talking about proposals or future plans, do not rush to conclusions, but also do not ignore the possibility that Allah may be slowly opening a door in your life. Because sometimes the first sign that a new chapter is approaching is simply a conversation that appears again and again until you begin to notice it. And that conversation may be the beginning of a story that Allah has already written long before you ever imagined it. Among the most beautiful moments in a believer's life are the quiet hours of the night, when the world becomes silent, when lights in most homes turn off, when streets grow calm and the noise of daily life fades away. There is a special time during these hours that holds incredible spiritual power. the last portion of the night. This is the time when many believers wake up for tahajjud, a prayer that is not obligatory, yet it carries a closeness to Allah that few other moments in life can match. During the final days of Ramadan, something remarkable begins to happen to some people. They suddenly feel drawn toward these quiet nights, even if they were not regular in tahajjud before. Their heart wakes them, sometimes without an alarm, sometimes with a strange feeling that pulls them out of sleep. They sit up in the darkness and feel an urge to stand before Allah. At first, they may not fully understand why this is happening. Perhaps they only intended to wake up for suhoor. Perhaps they planned to rest after Taraweeh. But suddenly their heart wants something else. It wants to pray. It wants to speak to Allah. It wants to raise its hands in dua while the world sleeps. This change can feel very emotional. The believer may stand in prayer and feel a softness in their heart that they have never experienced before. Verses of the Quran begin touching them more deeply. Their sujood becomes longer. Their whispers in dua become more sincere. And sometimes during those quiet moments of tahajjud in the last nights of Ramadan, a particular dua begins repeating again and again. A dua for a righteous spouse, a dua for a peaceful home, a dua for a partner who will help them remain strong in faith. And this is not a small moment, because tahajjud is one of the most powerful times for dua. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ taught that during the last part of the night, Allah's mercy descends in a special way. Allah calls out to his servants, "Is there anyone asking so that I may give to them? Is there anyone seeking forgiveness so that I may forgive them? Is there anyone making dua so that I may answer them?" Imagine this moment. The entire world is sleeping, but a believer wakes up. They stand quietly before Allah. They raise their hands, and they ask sincerely for a life partner who will help them walk toward Jannah. And do you think such a dua goes unheard? Never. Allah hears every whisper of the heart, and many scholars say something very beautiful about tahajjud. They say that when Allah intends to grant a blessing to his servant, he sometimes first invites that servant to the place where the dua will be accepted. Tahajjud becomes that invitation. The servant thinks they woke up on their own, but in reality, Allah called them. He allowed their heart to wake up. He allowed their soul to seek him in the quiet darkness of the night. And during Ramadan, especially in the final days, these nights become even more powerful, because within these nights lies Laylatul Qadr, the night of decree, a night that Allah describes in the Quran as better than 1,000 months. On this night, angels descend with mercy, destinies are written, and blessings are distributed, and the du'as of sincere believers carry immense weight. Some people unknowingly make life-changing du'as during these nights. A du'a for guidance, a du'a for forgiveness, a du'a for a righteous spouse, and months later they realize that their life began changing soon after that moment. The proposal appeared, the meeting happened, the Nikah was written, all because of a du'a made in the quiet darkness of Ramadan's final nights. And sometimes Allah begins preparing that moment by first placing a deep love for tahajjud inside the believer's heart. The person who once struggled to wake up suddenly finds themselves longing for that time. They look forward to those silent hours. They feel peace standing alone before Allah. They feel hope pouring their heart out in dua. And when this happens, it often means something beautiful is unfolding in their life. Because tahajjud is where many destinies begin to change. It is where broken hearts are healed. It is where lost souls find guidance. It is where prayers that seemed impossible begin moving toward acceptance. And sometimes it is also where two lives, still unknown to each other, begin moving closer toward the same future. So if during the last days of Ramadan you suddenly find yourself waking up in the night, standing in prayer when everyone else is asleep, and asking Allah sincerely for a righteous spouse, do not underestimate that moment. It may simply feel like a quiet prayer in the darkness, but in reality, it could be the very beginning of a story that Allah is preparing for your life. A story that started not with a meeting, not with a proposal, but with a believer standing alone in tahajjud, whispering their hopes to the one who writes every destiny. One of the most powerful changes that sometimes happens during the final days of Ramadan is not something that people around you can easily see. It happens quietly inside the heart. For many years, a person may focus on many different things in life. They think about success. They think about money. They think about personal goals, travel, education, or achievements. These desires are natural. Every person wants to build a better future. But sometimes, especially during the last days of Ramadan, something deeper begins to awaken inside the believer. A new desire slowly begins to grow, not for excitement, not for attention, but for peace. A person may suddenly start imagining something they never thought about seriously before. A peaceful home, a simple dinner after Maghrib with someone who shares their faith, praying Fajr together, reminding each other about Allah, reciting Quran in the same house, supporting each other during difficult days, laughing together during moments of happiness, and helping each other remain patient during trials. These thoughts begin appearing more often in the heart. At first they may feel surprising, because before this moment, the person may not have thought deeply about marriage. They may have been focused on other aspects of life, but suddenly their heart begins seeing marriage in a completely different way. Not as a social expectation, not as pressure from family, but as a beautiful partnership in faith. And this shift is extremely important, because in Islam, marriage is not only about companionship, it is about building a small world where faith grows stronger. Allah describes the relationship between spouses in a very powerful and beautiful way in the Quran. He says that spouses are garments for one another. Think about the meaning of a garment. A garment protects, a garment comforts, a garment covers the weaknesses of the one wearing it, and a garment stays close to the body. This description shows how deep the bond between husband and wife is meant to be. They are not strangers sharing a house. They are protectors for one another. They are sources of peace for one another. They help each other remain strong in faith. They help each other stay patient in times of hardship. And they help each other continue walking toward Jannah. But before Allah grants someone this type of relationship, He often prepares the heart to understand its true value. Because if a person enters marriage without this understanding, they may treat it lightly. They may chase temporary emotions instead of lasting commitment. They may focus on appearances instead of character. But when Allah prepares the heart properly, the believer begins searching for something much deeper. They begin asking themselves new questions. Who will help me become a better Muslim? Who will remind me to pray when I feel weak? Who will encourage me to remain patient during difficult times? Who will help me raise a family that loves Allah? Suddenly the standards change. External attraction may still matter, but it is no longer the main focus. Character becomes more important. Faith becomes more important. Kindness becomes more important. The believer begins realizing that beauty fades, wealth can disappear, but faith and character are what hold a marriage together for a lifetime. And during Ramadan, especially the final days, this realization often becomes stronger, because Ramadan reminds people of what truly matters in life: the constant rhythm of prayer, the recitation of Quran, the hunger of fasting that humbles the soul, the quiet nights where believers speak to Allah in sincerity. All of these experiences reshape the heart. They remind the believer that this life is temporary, and when someone begins seeing life through this lens, their desires begin changing. They no longer want relationships built on shallow foundations. They want a partner who will walk beside them on the path to Allah, someone who will stand beside them during Tahajjud, someone who will share their hopes for Jannah, someone who will raise children who love the Quran. This longing for a peaceful home is not weakness, it is a sign of maturity. It is a sign that the heart understands the beauty of what Allah has designed for marriage. And often, when this longing appears strongly during the final days of Ramadan, it may be because Allah is preparing the believer for this blessing. He is shaping their expectations. He is guiding their heart away from distractions. He is teaching them the true meaning of partnership. Because when the right person eventually enters their life, the believer will recognize the blessing. They will not take it for granted. They will appreciate the mercy that Allah placed between two hearts. Many married couples later say something very interesting. They say that before their marriage happened, they began imagining the type of home they wanted to build. A home filled with prayer, a home filled with kindness, a home where Allah is remembered often. And not long after those thoughts appeared, Allah opened the door to the person who would help build that home with them. Because sometimes Allah places the dream inside the heart first, and then, slowly, He brings the reality closer. And so if during these final days of Ramadan, you find yourself imagining a peaceful life with a righteous spouse, if your heart begins longing for a home where faith grows stronger, if you begin asking Allah sincerely for a partner who will walk beside you toward Jannah, do not dismiss those thoughts. They may simply be hopes of the heart, but they may also be the beginning of a beautiful chapter that Allah is slowly preparing in your life. A chapter where two believers meet. Two hearts connect through faith, and together they build a home filled with mercy, patience, and remembrance of Allah. There is a very subtle sign that sometimes appears in a believer's life during the last days of Ramadan. It is not something people around you can easily see. It does not appear in conversations. It does not come from family or friends. No, it happens quietly inside the heart. And yet it can be one of the strongest signs that something beautiful may be approaching in your life. That sign is hope, not ordinary hope, but a deep, calm, unexplainable hope that Allah is preparing something good for your future. Many people spend years worrying about marriage. They wonder if they will ever meet the right person. They wonder if their dua will ever be answered. Sometimes they feel discouraged when they see others getting married while their own life seems unchanged. These feelings are natural. Every human heart experiences moments of uncertainty. But sometimes, especially during the final days of Ramadan, something remarkable happens. A person who once felt worried about their future suddenly begins feeling calm. The anxiety slowly fades. The fear disappears. And in its place, a quiet confidence appears inside the heart. The believer begins trusting Allah more deeply than before. They begin believing that whatever Allah has written for them will arrive at the perfect time. Even if they cannot see the path yet, even if nothing seems to be changing around them, their heart still feels peaceful, still hopeful, still patient, and this change is very meaningful. Because hope is one of the greatest gifts Allah places inside the heart of a believer. It is the light that keeps a person moving forward even when they cannot see the destination. It is the feeling that reminds the believer that Allah's plan is always better than their own expectations. Sometimes Allah places this hope inside a person's heart as a preparation, a quiet reminder that the story of their life is still unfolding, and that something beautiful may be closer than they realize. During Ramadan, especially the final days, this hope can grow even stronger. Because Ramadan is a time when believers reconnect with their trust in Allah. They fast from dawn until sunset. They stand in long prayers at night. They recite the Quran and reflect on its meaning. They make countless du'as asking Allah for guidance, forgiveness, and blessings. All of these acts soften the heart. They remove the noise of daily life. They allow the believer to hear the quiet whispers of faith again. And when the heart becomes this soft, Allah sometimes fills it with a feeling that cannot easily be explained. A feeling that something good is coming. The believer may not know when, they may not know how, but they feel certain that Allah is taking care of their future. And this type of trust is very powerful because it transforms the way a person experiences life. Instead of worrying constantly, they begin living with patience. Instead of rushing destiny, they begin trusting the timing of Allah. Instead of comparing themselves with others, they begin focusing on their own relationship with their Creator. And this is exactly the kind of heart that is ready to receive a blessing. Because when someone trusts Allah deeply, they appreciate the gifts He gives them. They protect those gifts. They remain grateful. And marriage is one of the greatest gifts Allah gives to a believer. It is not just companionship, it is mercy, it is protection, it is tranquility. Allah describes marriage in the Quran with a beautiful word, sakina. Sakina means peace that settles in the heart. It is the feeling of calm that appears when two people build their life together in obedience to Allah. It is the comfort of knowing that someone stands beside you through every difficulty. It is the warmth of a home where faith is remembered every day. And sometimes before Allah grants this blessing, He prepares the believer by giving them a taste of that peace inside their own heart. A calmness, a sense of trust, a feeling that the future is in safe hands, even if the path ahead is still hidden. Many married couples later say something interesting when they look back at the time before their marriage happened. They say that shortly before they met their spouse, they experienced a strange calm in their heart. They stopped worrying about whether marriage would happen. They stopped feeling anxious about the future. 20. They simply trusted Allah. And soon after that moment of trust appeared, the door to Nikah opened in a way they never expected. Perhaps through a family connection, perhaps through a friend, perhaps through a completely unexpected introduction. But when it happened, they realized something beautiful. Allah had been preparing everything all along. The people, the circumstances, the timing, and most importantly, their own heart. Because when Allah gives a blessing at the right time, it feels natural, it feels peaceful, it feels like something that was meant to happen, not forced, not rushed, just perfectly written. And this is why the quiet hope that appears in the believer's heart during the final days of Ramadan is so meaningful. It may simply be a feeling, but it may also be a gentle sign from Allah that your story is still unfolding in ways you cannot yet see. So if during these last days of Ramadan, you find yourself feeling calm about your future, if your heart feels hopeful instead of worried, if you trust that Allah will bring the right person into your life when the time is right, hold on to that feeling, because that hope is a form of faith. It is a sign that your heart is learning to rely on Allah. And sometimes the believer who trusts Allah the most is the one whose life is about to change in the most beautiful way. Perhaps the person you have been making dua for is also somewhere raising their hands in prayer. Perhaps they are also asking Allah for a righteous spouse. Perhaps both of your duas are rising toward the heavens at the same moment. Two hearts, two prayers, for two lives that have not yet met, but a destiny that Allah has already written. And when the time arrives, the meeting will happen exactly as it was meant to. Until that moment comes, continue making dua, continue trusting Allah, continue filling your heart with hope, because the believer who places their trust in Allah is never abandoned, and the blessings written by Allah always arrive at the most perfect time. There is something very beautiful about the way Allah writes the story of marriage. Two people can live in completely different worlds. They may grow up in different cities, they may attend different schools, they may have different friends. Their lives may move in separate directions for many years. And yet, somewhere within the knowledge of Allah, their paths are already written to cross. Long before they meet, and long before they speak, long before they even know each other exists. Allah already knows the moment their story will begin. This is the beauty of destiny, because sometimes what feels like coincidence in our lives is actually a carefully written part of Allah's plan. A conversation that seems random, a meeting that seems unexpected, a proposal that appears at the exact moment when the heart is ready. When we look at these moments from the outside, they may appear ordinary, but when we look deeper, we realize something incredible. Allah has been arranging the pieces of the story for a long time. Years before the Nikah happens, years before the families meet, years before the couple even imagines their future together. Allah begins preparing the path. Sometimes He prepares the heart first. The believer becomes more patient, more sincere, more connected to Allah. Their priorities begin changing. They start seeking a life built on faith rather than temporary desires. Then Allah prepares the circumstances. Family members begin mentioning marriage. Friends begin discussing the future. Opportunities begin appearing that were never there before. And slowly, step by step, the path toward Nikah begins forming. But one of the most powerful moments in this journey is something that often happens during Ramadan. Because Ramadan is a month when hearts become closer to Allah than any other time of the year. It is a month when believers ask Allah for the deepest desires of their hearts. Some ask for forgiveness, some ask for guidance, some ask for relief from hardship, and many ask Allah for a righteous spouse. And during the final days of Ramadan, these duas become even more sincere. Because the believer knows that these nights are special. They know that Laylatul Qadr may be hidden within these nights. They know that Allah's mercy is closer than ever. So they raise their hands in the darkness of the night, and they ask. They ask with sincerity. They ask with hope. They ask with the belief that Allah hears every whisper. And sometimes during those very nights, something beautiful begins happening. The dua that has been made for months, or perhaps for years, begins moving closer to acceptance. The believer may not see it yet, but Allah is already preparing the moment when their life will change. Perhaps somewhere else in the world, another person is also making the same dua. They are asking Allah for a righteous spouse. They are asking for someone who will strengthen their faith. They are asking for someone who will help them build a home filled with remembrance of Allah. Two people, two separate lives, two separate prayers rising toward the heavens, and Allah already knows that their stories will soon become one. This is one of the most beautiful aspects of marriage in Islam. It is not only a meeting between two individuals, it is the meeting of two destinies. And when the time finally arrives, it often happens in a way that feels surprisingly natural. A family member introduces the idea, a friend mentions someone, a conversation begins, and suddenly the door that seemed closed for years quietly opens. The meeting happens, the families speak, the proposal appears, and the nikah that Allah had written long ago finally begins to unfold. Well, for many couples, when they look back at this moment, they realize something remarkable. They realize that the signs were there all along. The change in their heart during Ramadan, the stronger connection with Allah, the deeper sincerity in their du'as, the unexpected conversations about marriage, the hope that suddenly appeared inside their heart. All of those moments were not random. They were steps along the path that Allah was guiding them through. Because Allah does not only write the final moment, He writes every step that leads toward it. Every dua, every moment of patience, every test that strengthens the heart, every quiet night when the believer places their trust in Him. All of these moments become part of the story that leads to the blessing. And when the blessing finally arrives, it often feels like a moment of peace rather than excitement, because the heart recognizes something special. It recognizes that Allah has answered a prayer, not always in the way we expected, but always in the way that is best. Marriage in Islam is not simply about romance. It is about building a life that helps both partners move closer to Allah. It is about helping each other remain patient during hardship. It is about supporting one another during times of weakness. It is about creating a home where faith grows stronger every day. And when Allah brings two hearts together for this purpose, the relationship becomes something much deeper than ordinary companionship. It becomes an act of worship. Every act of kindness becomes a reward. Every moment of patience becomes a source of barakah. Every prayer performed together becomes a step toward Jannah. And that is why the story of Nikah is one of the most beautiful stories a believer can experience. It begins with dua, it grows through patience, and it blossoms when Allah decides the time is right. So if during the last days of Ramadan you have noticed some of the signs we discussed, if your heart has changed, if your du'as have become deeper, if hope has appeared inside your heart, if conversations about marriage are suddenly appearing around you, do not rush destiny. Do not worry about timing. Simply continue placing your trust in Allah, because the believer who trusts Allah never loses. The story that Allah writes is always more beautiful than the one we try to write ourselves. And perhaps somewhere beyond what you can currently see, Allah is already guiding someone toward your life, someone whose heart is also searching for faith, someone whose du'as are also rising toward the heavens, someone whose destiny is slowly moving closer to yours. And when the moment finally arrives, you will realize something extraordinary. The story did not begin when you met. It began long before that. It began the moment you placed your trust in Allah and asked Him for a righteous spouse. And every sincere dua that followed brought that moment closer, until the day arrived when two separate lives finally became one path, a path walking together toward faith, mercy, and Jannah. As the final days of Ramadan quietly pass, the nights become more precious, the hours feel shorter, and every sincere believer begins asking themselves one question: did I truly use this blessed month in the best way? Ramadan is not only about fasting, it is about hearts changing, it is about destinies being written. It is about moments when Allah opens doors in a believer's life that they never expected. And sometimes, among the many blessings Allah writes during these final nights, is the blessing of Nikah, a righteous spouse, a peaceful home, a partner who reminds you to pray, a partner who stands beside you during the difficult days and the beautiful ones. But the most important thing to remember is this: marriage is not something we force, it is something Allah writes. When the time is right, the path opens, the right people appear, the right conversations happen, and the heart recognizes that Allah has answered a prayer. So if you notice some of these signs during the last days of Ramadan, do not become impatient. Instead, continue doing the most powerful thing a believer can do. Make dua. Ask Allah for a spouse who will bring you closer to Him. Ask Allah for a marriage filled with mercy, patience, and barakah. Ask Allah for a home where His name is remembered every day. Because the most beautiful marriages are not built only on love. They are built on faith. And when Allah writes a marriage for two people, no distance, no delay, and no obstacle can stop it. Before you leave this video, write Ameen in the comments if you are making dua for a righteous spouse. And tell me something. What country are you watching from tonight? May Allah grant every sincere heart a spouse who strengthens their faith, a home filled with peace, and a marriage that becomes a path toward Jannah. Ameen.